Lovely, let's get going. So, feet hip width apart, toes pointing forwards. Just have your weight a little bit forwards, and we're trying to get the weight to settle just behind the ball of the foot. Just to go over what I was just saying before we started. What we actually do is you can spread your toes out and then draw them back towards the arch of your foot, and you create a little kind of hollow there. If you've ever filled up a sink of water, I used to do this as a kid, and you put your hand over the plug hole. You take the plug out, put your hand over the plug hole, and go to pull your hand up, and you get a sense of suction. And sometimes when I'm doing that, I get a sense of that same kind of pulling down through that point just behind the border of the foot. So for those of you who are comfortable with that idea of your weight just behind the ball of each foot, and remember, it's a significant adjustment to the body that can help to just draw your hips down a little bit, as well as to just tone up the arch of your foot. See, you know, it's one of those things that you have to sort of think about quite a lot to begin with, but gradually begins to become more natural. So maybe with that in mind, maybe not, just turning in the center of your body. So between hips and waist is the area I'm talking about at the moment. Turn there, your arms follow, your rib cage follows the hips, shoulders follow the rib cage, arms follow the shoulders. Arms being quite heavy, but not in a kind of drudgery way, but fairly kind of supple and mobile, but nevertheless aware of the weight of your arms. And just see if you can start to feel the support for your body being upright, not as a result of tightening up in your back or your shoulders or your neck, or trying to kind of pull yourself up. But it's a combination of, first thing is the support from your legs and your back have a slightly fuller, denser quality to them. Again, not tight. So your back in particular will support the front of your body. Your legs support your upper body. And at the same time, if I exaggerate, this weight going forwards encourages a feeling of your hips dropping back. Your knees will bend very slightly, but you know, that's just a natural thing. So stay soft in your knees. And that gentle dropping back of your hips and the leveling off of your pelvis starts to bring you to the upright position. Obviously, it works through your back, and therefore, you know, a good alignment, a good structure, good tone, good muscle tone in your back. But none of those should equal a sense of tightening. So this means that we maintain an upright posture with a sense of what I would refer to as spaciousness. So without the gripping of muscles, say in your shoulders or your chest or wherever, that is sort of, then you open up the body. It's the difference between wearing a top that's half a size too small as opposed to a top that's half a size bigger than you actually need. You just have a little bit more room for movement. And it's that movement within the body, as well as the movements that we see, if you like, the external movements that we're beginning to just be aware of, and bring our attention to those movements, and to bring our intent to that movement. So the intent here is very, very simple. The intent is to turn from one side to another, and to try and maintain this posture at the same time. So with the release of tightness in the front of your body, you may notice that, for instance, your breathing comes more easily. You may notice a greater sense of circulation, of movement within the body. And I emphasize the may. There's no there's no guarantees, especially when you start off a session. It takes a while for the body to get going, but all of these are part of the outcome of this change in posture. Change in posture and the movement itself is unforced. Once you've started, you think about it, you turn in one direction. So on the opposite side of the way you've turned, all the muscles and the tendons and the fascia and so on and so forth on that side of your body, roughly speaking, and down into your leg, a lot of it is extended out. If you hold that posture, you'll notice that, and all those tissues are elastic. So you stretch out elastic and then release it, and it's just a natural contraction. And so the movement in one direction is not only important in itself, which of course it is, but it also establishes the basis, the starting point for the next stage of the move. And these are all things that we want to try and recognize in the slower movements of the forms, in the exercises. And going a little bit faster can add that benefit of a sense of momentum, which is often easier to recognize to begin with. So we could use a variety of terms to cover that internal movement, depending on various circumstances and what suits us best, what means most to us. We're going a bit faster than I've just mentioned momentum. The slower movements, it could be flow. Momentum may come apart. It could be a sense of connection in the body. We might think of energy, whatever. There's various things, and we have therefore three elements in Tai Chi. Elements are being referred to as the three treasures or the three jewels of our body, our physical body, aspects of mind, the focusing of the mind, the development of our attention and our intent, and the movement itself, the energy. These are the three treasures that come together, and sometimes it says first in the mind, and which mostly just refers, I think, in the beginning to quietening your mind. But don't get too much caught up in it's got to be the mind first or whatever. Remember, these things are merging in the middle. So if you think of a tripod, then each leg of the tripod is supporting the other two, and it's being supported by the other two at the same time. So it's that kind of mutual dependency, I suppose you could call it, or whatever, which you choose to focus on at any particular moment, again, will vary. So sometimes there's an emphasis on getting your physical posture right, for instance, and so on and so forth. But in the process of doing something like that, you're paying attention to your physical posture. If you're paying attention to your physical posture, you're training yourself to remain attentive. You might use an image. If you use various images, and if one of them works for you, we pay attention to that image. We have the intent to match the qualities of those images, and that would have a physical effect. So yeah, there's this interaction between all three of those strands. Then just raising your arms. This is the background. I mean, I've said it very simply, and it really isn't complicated. But what I don't want to do is to create the impression that this is somehow easy in that sense. It's not these things that I'm talking about are not easy things to produce and to sustain. Okay, just drop your hands down. So I'll show you from the side. Do this little exercise, just rocking our weight forwards and back, because I'm exaggerating this a great deal so you can see what I'm doing. The actual movement would be like this, you'd hardly see it, because what you want to do is to bring your weight to position on the balls of the feet when you go forwards, and your heels when you go back, maybe a little bit more as your heels settle in. But just a range of movement where you're still able to enjoy the support of your legs for your upper body. Because if I'm here and I do this, I stumble forwards. The other thing to think about is here, if I do this, if I bring my head forwards, then I throw my body out of line. It's just a very gentle sway, and you can imagine doing this in water up to shoulder height, so that you begin to train your body to move, so that soft resistance is there. That's another thing that, if you can maintain that image, will help you to develop a sense of connection and flow within your body, and indeed strength. And see if you can find some kind of midpoint. So, if I were to get this pole and think, well, I want to balance it on the ground, I could do this. And in theory, somewhere between here and here, and about here, difficult to find, but you can see how difficult it is to find. It's not a complicated idea, but in theory, there's a point where it will stand upright. Clearly, very difficult to find, and there's lots of different factors that will affect that. But as close as you can, let your body come to settle in that position, and once again, just try and allow your hips to drop back. And the hips drop back a little bit more, so you go down a bit more, and so with this alignment, we actually begin to create an environment within the body that allows our weight to drop down. It allows, I talked about the spaciousness and the free passage of movement. One of those movements, very important part of this, is to pull a gravity through your body. If we can maintain this alignment here, I'm not being pulled forwards or backwards, so I don't have to strain against gravity. And our center of gravity slowly begins to drop. This is rooting down. So rooting down is one of the primary qualities that we look to cultivate in Tai Chi. The lower your center of gravity, and hence the better the alignment of your posture, because that's what allows it. The lower your center of gravity, the more stable you become, and the less weight there is on your upper body. So again, that then has an impact on the flow of the movement. Bring your hands around as though you're cradling the ball. You push up like a plant growing out of its root, out of its seed, and then drop back in. So people who are used to this, just try and recognize what's happening in terms of extension and contraction. You push up, so your legs get straighter. They don't completely straighten, so they expand. The distance to your hips expands. Your hips being pushed up like that pushes up through your back, and again, your back, spine expand, and that expansion will push out through the rest of your body. And so we establish this very fundamental and consistent rhythm: expansion, contraction, lengthening, shortening. It could be described in lots of ways. So there's a great deal going on in this exercise that is significant to everything else that we do. One of the reasons I always start with it. Remember, it's much easier and much more effective to be able to establish these principles and these ideas as real things within your body with a simpler movement than with one of the more complex movements. This time, turn your hands palm down, but fingers out, pushing up. This is the wild goose, with this quite strong image of a bird in flight, and whatever that may convey to you, if it conveys anything. Remember that the images may not work for you. Not every image is going to work for everybody. Some will work sometimes, not others. So I would always suggest not laboring the imagery. And not to get too caught up in it. Don't start sort of, I don't know, wondering what colour the goose is or whatever. We're trying to draw back into ourselves the qualities that we find in the images. The fluidity of movement, the grace of the wings, and so on and so forth. And then parting the clouds, your hands crossed in front of your belly, pushing up. Slightly more abstract image, but think about, what it's like for people in the moment. If you look out your window, if I look out my window, there's lots of grey cloud out there. But if the sun were to come out, there'd be this much more open, expansive quality begin to develop. And that's saying, again, that brings us back to that spaciousness within the body. One more time. Change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. One side, and on that side, your elbow gets pushed up, drawing your fingers up. At the top of the movement, wind your hands around like you're plucking something and pull down. And then change to the other side. When I mentioned that idea first in the mind, I talked about paying attention. And if your mind is too busy, it's hard to pay attention. And this is a very interesting exercise because sometimes we can start off doing it like this, one side, and you're taking your time, your hand comes down, rests, and then you think about the other side, and it does that. And then after a few rounds, you're sort of 3/4 of the way down here, and already this hand is starting to twitch. You want to rush ahead. And just gently pull away from that urge to rush if you're feeling it by bringing your attention to the descending hand. You'll drop down, it goes to your side. As the arm reaches its full length, your fingers unfold, and only then do you transfer your attention across. You may feel a difference between one side of your body and another. That's not unusual. Do one more after this one. And then changing. So we've got two movements. We'll just do the first and the last of this set for the moment. One is a movement that as you push your hands out, you may feel a kind of broadening across your back. And with your hips sinking down and your hands pushing up, that's a lengthening. So there's a bit of a contrast there. Your hands stay slightly in front of your body. It's useful to notice that, because I talked earlier about sort of beginning to pay attention to the patterns of movement within your body. Sometimes it's easier to do that if you've got two different patterns, one after the other. You can notice the change. And again, if we can do that with a simpler movement, then we train our minds to recognize it in other circumstances, like learning anything. And then pushing your hands out, just turn again in the center of your body. Hands do the same thing, but they're directed by what's happening in your center. So an increasingly useful and accessible point of focus for your attention becomes that middle part of your body. That part of your body that you want to feel as though is sinking through your legs to the ground. That part of your body where the hips drop back and draw your head up. And as you get more used to a movement like this, you realize that that rhythm of expansion and contraction can start from your feet and your legs, but in this particular exercise, it will actually start from the middle of your body, expanding out in all directions and then contracting back in. Again, we have that regular, steady rhythm. One more round of this. And then let your hands drop down. And on one side, just letting the expansion push your hand out so it swings up until it reaches, well, in line with your nose, really, and then straight down. Feel how your arm rotates. As just sliding your hand along the inside of an arched doorway or something like that. Again, we get the expansion to one side of our body, which is the movement we want to focus on as much as possible. And if it's comfortable this time, when your hand reaches that top position, add the turn. And then change the other side. Once again, notice if there's any difference between one side and another, not at all uncommon. And quite often the movements will have to smooth out those differences. Then you can add the turn. Then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. And usually for this and the next one, we tilt the body, but we do it by our hips going back, by dropping our center of gravity. This is not a back bend. So from here, your arms come up. First thing you do is push your hips back. You see how that sends the shoulders forward. So even if you know these exercises, it's always worth, sometimes I go through them fairly quickly, but it's always worth revisiting them in some detail. And then same thing for polishing the table, but you add the horizontal turn in. As you go back, your hands get pushed forward and swept around in circle back to start and then change direction. Good, and then just let your hands drop down. Come back to this posture. Let's see how it feels now after doing what's the, about 20-25 minutes of actual movement. Once I've gone through some details of the posture, that can change both our perspective on our posture, but also, of course, it's going to have a physical effect on our body. We've warmed up a bit, settled in a bit, and so on. So it may feel a little bit different this time. Just shake it out. Okay, so let's change the stance. From this position here, turn 1 foot out, and this is an angle that you can play about with. Step straight forwards with the other foot. I mean straight forwards rather than this, which would be a diagonal step and would leave you with this sort of bounce on the tightrope kind of feeling. This again gives you the space to allow your center of gravity to drop. You can't really see it at that angle. Let me do it this way. It'll be easier for me. Yeah. So you can see my front foot is in front of my back foot, of course, but it's not a big stride. So if I put the feet together in the way I said you shouldn't do, you can see roughly what the distance is between sort of front and back foot. It's not back here, but it's not right out here either. So it's a longer, wider step than we would normally take. One that allows us to maintain the posture of the body and to just begin to move from one foot to another. A longer step, we may have to angle the body or something like that. But we now want to move with this upright position. So in the first instance, it's really important that we feel this movement in our legs. And some of you have seen this before, it's worth repeating. But here, if I get this bottle, one day this will fail, won't it? But if I want to move the bottle out the way and I say, lift my foot up and I just push on the top of the bottle, it falls over straight away. But if oops, I told you it would fail. If I'm careful and I nudge it with my foot, I'm going to do it this way. Yeah, that's better. If I do this, if I move from the bottom, it's less likely to tip over. He says tipping over. It's not working today, but you get the idea. You know, if say you've got a stack of books or maybe a load of boxes stacked up in a room, and you want to move them to one side, you would push on the bottom box. So the principal movement here comes from our feet, which in its turn comes from that compression of the leg and foot. And just as I talked about there being an elasticity in our body, we can imagine our legs, for instance, as being like springs. You can press a spring and sooner or later it's going to push back. So by focusing on the rooting down, on the sense of sinking into one foot, we eventually start to feel a push coming back. And although I always say jokingly, actually, I really do mean if you could get to do this on something like a trampoline or a bouncy castle, because in a sense, one way of describing this, you know, not necessarily the best way in some ways, but one aspect of this is that you're bouncing from leg to leg. It's just that you're not coming up. You're trying not to let the hips come up and down. As much as possible, hips and shoulders at a level. So this is interesting because both with the parallel stance and the sinking down and the pushing up, and with this one, the sinking down into each leg and then the movement pushing you forwards or backwards. One of the key things to be aware of, and I suppose one of the things that you could argue initiates the movement, if you like to think of it like that, or drives the movement, is this downward pull of gravity and our ability to create the space to yield to it, to allow it to pull us down rather than straining to keep us up. So this downward and upward dynamic, I think, is one of the most important ones in Tai Chi. As much as possible, the line across your shoulders, the line across your hips, kind of parallel to the screen if you're looking at the screen. Next time you go into your back foot, rest in there and just flex your front foot so your toes come on. You can have your toes slightly turned down. And then when you go into your front foot, you push your back knee forwards and your heel comes up. This movement allows a little bit more of your weight to build up, flowing down through each individual leg. They're also both movements that encourage a downward movement through the hip that you're resting on. Notice whether you're doing something like this. You're going forward, say, you go to lift the heel up and you pull with your shoulders. We don't need to do that with this. We're not going for speed or power or anything. And gradually more and more of the weight settling down into that supporting leg until ideally all that's left really is in what we would refer to as the empty leg in Tai Chi, is the weight of the leg itself. Pelvis is still level, you're still upright, hips still sinking back, and so on and so forth. So that when you get to the stage, all you have to do is to kind of pull on the foot through your leg and then push it back out. Contract the leg or pull on the foot, whichever way you want to think of it. You imagine, for instance, that you've been walking across a muddy field and suddenly one foot's gone right deep in the mud. What you don't want to do under those circumstances is lean forwards and kind of pull the foot out like that, because you're probably going to go face down in the mud. You're very careful and you pull. So obviously we're stepping, but in some ways I'm trying to direct your attention away from the idea of stepping, because that in itself creates an intent to step, not unreasonably, and we don't want to step in our kind of regular way, slightly different. So try that with your other foot forwards. And then beginning to raise your toes and your heel. And then when you're ready again, that little pull on the foot. And to extend that image of walking across the muddy field a little further, if it was really sort of like a muddy track, what you might do at times is put your foot there just to see how deep is the mud, as opposed to just putting your foot out and kind of falling into it and getting stuck again. And another image might be as though you're walking on thin ice. Either way, what we want to do is we step forward, you put your heel down, you lower your toes, and then you commit the weight. Same idea going back, except it's the ball of your foot that will go down. So this is not how we would normally walk, unless we were walking on a muddy field, or maybe on an ice-covered pavement or something like that. And we have to take a little bit more care as a rule when we do that kind of thing. And yet, this is in and of itself a kind of core component of that, what I think of as everyday walking. This time, bring your foot forwards and out, keep the width of your step, heel, toes, and then weight, or the other way around if you're going backwards. Take your time. Feel the contact with the floor, the ground beneath your feet before you move the weight forwards. Settle your weight in, and only then start to pick up the other foot. Remember where you want your weight to settle, which is just behind the ball of your foot, which tends to be a little bit trickier when we're going backwards, most of us. If you haven't done so already, you can change direction at this point. I can't notice it, my shirt's a bit crooked, but what I'm trying to do when I bring my foot in is to maintain my pelvis being level. I don't want to do this, because that happens straight away. And I don't want to tilt it forwards or backwards. Try going forwards again. Again, if it helps you to have an image here, imagine your pelvis as being like a bowl of water that you're carrying across the room. And what you don't want to do, of course, is to shake the water out. Don't strengthen it. Don't lock up around your hips and your pelvis, unless that's the only thing that's going to stop you falling over, of course. But rather allow the hips to drop. Allow gravity to do the leveling off work for you. And then going in the other direction. And big out. Check out. So again, these are very simple ideas. If I wanted to bounce the ball, then I'd have to allow the ball to drop, and gravity would pull the ball down, and that would enable the bounce up. But it's not how we would normally respond to the pull of gravity. So making these ideas work is actually very difficult. And could spend a long time just working on things like the walking. And it's always valuable to do that. There are some lovely sequences of movements and some very complex movements in this whole system. And they're great to be able to learn, but we always find ourselves coming back to the absolute foundations. So now we're going to use that movement of the weight and eventually the step in to move the arms, to get that sense of movement, that flow, that energy going into our upper body, and hence into our arms. First exercise, again, this is familiar to most of you, but by starting my back foot, if you just watch for a moment, if I imagine somebody has hold of my hands, I move my body forwards, but my hands remain behind. There's a little opening feeling here down the front of my arm, and they release my hands, and a combination of the weight of my arms and that contraction there swings my arms through. And then I go back, same thing. So there we get a little bit of movement, and when we can maintain that order of movement, hips move, shoulders move, arms follow, then we can allow the arm to become a little bit more integrated into the movement, and the movement will gradually build. But don't start with the arms. So have your right foot forwards, push forwards, and then this time letting your arms follow through. This is fisherman casting. And especially as it's a simple movement you're familiar with. Can you just detect some sense of a patterning, a movement coming through your back and your spine? Notice whether there are areas that feel a bit stiff or tight. Sometimes we find we're simply bringing our attention to those areas, and in the process of doing that, probably bringing our intention to those areas, it actually enables them to release the tightness. It doesn't always work out. Sometimes we need to be a bit more analytical. And then push away. So here, the wave movement, pushing your arms forwards. Both these movements were facing the front, so this time sit back and turn, your hands swing down again. This time let them circle right up, go forwards and turn. Make it a sort of sideways figure of 8 shape with your hands and your fingers, guided by the combination of your weight moving and your center turn. Time going forwards. And shake. So have your other foot forwards. Sit your weight back, fisherman casting neck. Lovely wave-like movements working from your back foot through your back into your front, and hence to your arms. Same kind of idea going back. Very soft in your shoulders. changing now to pushing wave, a little bit more focus, a little bit stronger feel. Lose touch with what's happening in your legs and your feet. And this time, as you come back the turn, notice how that brings your hands to your back hip. You go up and you go down, you go forwards and turn, and the hands just naturally drop down, of course, and they come across your forehead. This time, turning your front foot out again. And as you turn, let the turn help to bring your back heel up and your foot in, and then step in the way that we did before and go forwards. You can either bring the foot in and then just take the step in the ordinary way that we did before. You can bring the foot in, you might want to lift it up a bit if you feel comfortable with that. Remember that when we do that, we're looking for that level posture in our pelvis. If I do this, suddenly I'm falling over. So, take your time, maybe try it once or twice if it's not suitable for you, and be patient. And you won't get it right every time. Sooner or later there's a little wobble. So sometimes when I'm doing this, I find I'm wobbling around, and if maybe I can just settle my hips, I can get that stability back. But again, it won't happen every time. This time, just bring your feet back. And the way to work with that thing, when I get a little wobble, what do I do? Essentially, we're trying to relax. Again, simple idea, very difficult. Hold on to something, raise your leg, and see if you can feel that sense of the dropping of your hips. These are all individual components, and remember, these things are an ongoing study and practice. There isn't, after 40 years old doing this, there's no end in sight, shall we say. So feet parallel again, just rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. And your arms. On the other side. And then on your back. Around your hips. And your legs. Light on your belly. And onto the upper part of your chest. Okay. again, related to that sense of dropping your hips again, that sense of coming back, this last exercise can illustrate that process very nicely. Give you a sense of just quietening, calming, settling again, centering, rooting down, however you think of it. Embrace tiger, return to me. Hips sink back, pushing up a little bit like the wild goose to start off with, but then you bring your arms around, feel they're going to hold the ball against your chest. Your elbows drop and that brings your hands in, you turn them palm down and hips drop and everything settles. Embrace tiger, return to mountain. Just feel how you come back to that sense of stillness, the mountain, the root. Just for a moment, you're not aiming to sort of like live there for the rest of your life. This becomes a useful exercise and a useful idea that we can return to these qualities, even if we don't feel that we've got them there. They're not lost forever. One more time. And stand. Lovely, that went very quickly. Thank you very much, everybody.